see that. Okay. Now I do. Okay, I just have to get rid of that. Got it. All right. Good morning, everybody. We are here for Verónica Dávila De Jesús's thesis defense. Her thesis is a translation and a critical introduction or preface of Los Otros Cuerpos, antología de temática gay, lésbica y queer desde Puerto Rico y su diáspora, which includes writings by various authors in Puerto Rico and also in the diaspora. And I'm very happy to welcome our readers, Professors Marian Polhill from the Comparative Literature Department and Luis García Nevares from the Programa Graduado de Traducción, which can be translated as well. In any event, first what we're going to do is Verónica Dávila is going to give us an introduction, and then after that we will go to the readers who will give their own input, their observations and comments and criticisms, and that's pretty much it. I'd like to welcome those people who may be watching or listening out there in the World Wide Web. Welcome to this defense. And okay, so Verónica, without further ado, if you don't mind giving your presentation.
Is the presentation being shared? Hello?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. So, good morning. Before I begin, I would like to thank the professors Marian Polhill and Luis García Nevares for reading my thesis and accepting being a part of my thesis committee, and my advisor, David Auerbach, Professor David Auerbach, for his help, suggestions, and advice throughout this process. As my advisor mentioned, I chose 3 texts from the anthology Los Otros Cuerpos, antología de temática gay, lésbica y queer desde Puerto Rico y su diáspora, title which I rendered as Other Bodies, a gay, lesbian, and queer anthology from Puerto Rico and its diaspora. And I chose 3 texts: a short story by Emilio del Carril, which is Un rayo de luz para la luna negra, and 2 essays, one by Frances Negrón-Muntaner, which is Metiendo la Pata, and another by Rubén Ríos Ávila, titled Queer Nation. Hold on. Why is this? Okay. I would like to begin by giving a brief overview of the anthology itself. It was published in 2007 as a space of expression for the Puerto Rican LGBTQ+ community, as well as the community of its diaspora, at a time when sentiments on the island were still fairly negative, and queer themes were quite taboo at the time. And as such, it gathers short stories, poems, novel excerpts, and essays by 44 different authors from Puerto Rico and its diaspora that depict situations that members of the community could encounter in their day-to-day life, as well as explore issues such as homophobia, transphobia, the process of discovering these aspects of your identity and accepting, and the process of acceptance of that identity. And the reasons why I chose it, I believe that given these depictions and the exploration of these issues, make it a beneficial tool of self-discovery and self-reflection for those still learning about themselves, and I think it should be available to those that are either maybe not fluent in Spanish or maybe don't speak Spanish at all, and not only for members of the LGBTQ+ community, but also to allies, because there are texts in the book that could help them better understand what members of the community could go through. Next, I'm going to talk a bit about the authors and their texts, starting with Frances Negrón-Muntaner. She was born in San Juan, Puerto Rico in 1996, and she studied sociology in the University of Puerto Rico before continuing her studies in the United States, acquiring a master's degree in visual anthropology and fine arts and film and video in Temple University, and a PhD in comparative literature in Rutgers University. She is a writer, activist, and filmmaker who has explored issues of sexuality, colonialism, migration, specifically illegal migration, and nationalism through her work, which has taken many forms, such as films, books, and articles. These are a few of her work. The films Ace in the Barrio, Eso No Me Pasa a Mí, which she co-directed, Brincando el Charco, Retrato de una Puertorriqueña, which follows her experience as a lesbian activist who is also a member of the Puerto Rican Diaspora. And these are books that she worked as an editor for or wrote. Next, I will be talking about Emilio del Carrin. He was born in San Sebastián in 1959. He has a master's degree in creative writing and a PhD in philosophy and literature with a concentration on Puerto Rican and Caribbean literature. He specializes in narrative theory, autofiction, and the theme of the erotic sacred in literature. And he has presented his work in various countries, his articles and creative works in various countries, such as Mexico, Peru, the Dominican Republic, Argentina, and Puerto Rico, among others. And these are some of his works. 5 Minutos para Ser Infiel, which was published in 2007 as well, and was where he originally published Un rayo de luz para la luna negra, which is one of the texts I translated, and then El Tren de la Grúa. Finally, I will be talking about Rubén Ríos Ávila, he's a former professor in the University of Puerto Rico, where he taught for 30 years and before retiring, and then become a professor at NYU. He has written numerous articles on Puerto Rican and Caribbean queer literature and queer theory specifically. And he has also received various awards from the Puerto Rican chapter of the Pen Club International. Some of his works include La Raza Cómica del Sujeto en Puerto Rico and Embocadura. And the text I translated for him was Queer Nation. Next, I will be talking about the texts themselves, starting with Un rayo de luz para la luna negra, which the title of which I rendered as a ray of light for the dark moon. This is a short story where the main character, Miguel, he is 70 years old, living in a home for the elderly with his wife. And he discovers, he makes a new friend, and throughout the story discovers that he's, for the first time in his life, attracted to another man. And he is discovering that aspect of his identity. What drew me to this story specifically was the representation of senior members of the community, because this is not something, this is not something I have seen much of, if at all, and be it in books or TV series or movies, although I don't really watch TV series, but it is not something that I have seen myself. And this touches on themes of homophobia, because the character does admit to past homophobic attitudes in the past. Internalized homophobia, because that past homophobia translates to him berating himself for this new attraction, and the process of accepting yourself, or at least the beginnings of that process. As for Metiendo la Pata and Queer Nation, they both touch on themes, they both tackle homophobia in different ways and at different levels. For example, Metiendo la Pata focuses more on how it affects public figures specifically, while Queer Nation, it takes a more general approach, towards the general populace. In Metiendo la Pata, there's the theme of the title of which I rendered as Screwing Up, because the author explains that considers these two, the two articles that she talks about in the text, she considers screw-ups, because she thought that it was possible to talk about these things at the time, and apparently it wasn't. And it touches on the theme of queerness seen as an Achilles heel for public figures and their careers specifically, because it was seen as if, with the examples of Zaida Cuscuz Hernandez and Ricky Martin, which at the time, me fui en blanco. Sorry. Zaida Cuscuz Hernandez was accused by her colleagues, by fellow politicians, of possibly being a lesbian. And while Ricky Martin, there was always, before he came out, there was always the question of, is he or isn't he? And there was an apparent obsession with that possibility. And the author shares her own experience with censorship of these themes because of the perception that being queer in any way was an Achilles heel. And she argues, the articles she had censored were articles arguing that it shouldn't be a problem towards their careers if they are, or the possibility of them being gay or lesbian. It shouldn't have an effect on their ability to work as a politician or as a singer. And next, I will be talking about Queer Nation, about the text Queer Nation, where the titular phrase is used to describe Puerto Rico's position and relationship with the United States, calling it, this is a quote from the source text, una colonia queer por sus pretensiones nacionales o una nación queer por sus preferencias coloniales. And he argues that this relationship has led to a rigid idea of what Puerto Ricanness is, which is based on similarities, and it's possibly been reliant on similarities that we as Puerto Ricans have, which could lead to an aggravation of prejudice towards anything that could be considered as the other, which the LGBTQ plus community has been relegated to for a long time. Whoops, sorry. In his text, he also goes on to explain what he considers to be the root of homophobia through ideas that were brought by Freud. Specifically, Freud's idea that nations all have an origin, a point of origin that eventually becomes anathema to that nation. And for the LGBTQ plus community and the queer nation, that would be, he comes to the conclusion that would be queer desire, and that the community has found itself having to distance themselves from that, from queer desire in order to counteract homophobia, according to the text. Next, we are moving on to the translation itself and its challenges. Here I will be presenting a few challenges that I think are the most important, or the ones that took the longest time to think through and resolve. Starting with the use of derogatory language in the texts, because it is present in some manner in all three texts. I originally tried to change the language, make it more acceptable, you could say. But that then I realized for Un rayo de luz para la luna negra, that wouldn't work there, because the two instances where it is used as an expression of the main character's internalized homophobia. It is him berating himself for this new attraction to another man, and it is depicted as a white owl berating him, but it is a representation of him berating himself. Therefore, it is important to keep that in the text, and it is also, since he admitted to homophobic attitudes in the past, it's both the expression of his internal homophobia, and it would keep with the character, keep him in character. For the other two texts, it was for Queer Nation. It was, again, I tried to change the language, and it was pointed out to me in revisions that would sap the text of its energy, as well as of the anger towards the situation where being queer could have a detrimental effect on an individual's reputation, career, and possibly even endanger their life, which is one of the examples given at the end of the text deals with that possibility. And in Metiendo la Pata, there's a specific slogan that was used against Zaida Cucuza Hernandez when she had tried to run for office in San Juan. The slogan used was "No meta la pata in San Juan." And given the context for that was that her colleagues, other politicians, were accusing her of possibly being a lesbian and attacking her femininity to devalue her work as a politician. In that instance, I chose to leave the slogan in Spanish and expand to its meaning further in the sentence. Give a translation of the slogan afterwards. Next, I will be talking about should the term queer be capitalized. Wait, one moment. Okay. The first thing, again, this was brought to my attention through revisions. I checked. The first thing I did was I checked the NLA manual, the handbook, the 9th edition, which has a section on inclusive language. And it mentioned that depending on the term, dictionaries tend, if there's a dual usage, dictionaries tend to emphasize the preferred usage, and that if there is a known preference from the pertinent individual or community, this is what should be used. And giving for that second part, it gave the example of how the deaf community uses deaf with a capital D to refer to the culture and community, while using the lowercase for the hearing loss. However, I checked various dictionaries. There wasn't any indication if it should be capitalized or not. There was no dual usage for that one for queer, and there is no official stance from the community that I could find. However, I decided to capitalize the terms in a similar manner to the use for deaf, because of the term's history. Queer started out as a derogatory. Well, it started out as it meant strange, and then it took on the meaning of it was an insult towards the queer community, towards the LGBTQ plus community, specifically gay men at the time. But it has since been reclaimed by the community as an umbrella term and also as an identity for individuals that may not feel like they fit under male or female or in the binary of male female. And that is why I chose to capitalize it as an identity and as an umbrella term for the community. Sorry, and this, I also saw it as a way to because as a way to differentiate it from its other uses, because in Queer Nation, it is used with both meanings, both queer as in the LGBTQ plus community and queer as strange. And there are, at least on a first reading, it can be confusing which is meant at times. And I saw that as a bonus to the capitalization. And it is also I use the term queer in the translation for Un rayo de luz para la luna negra, when the main character is, for one of the instances where he is burying himself, and in that instance I left it lowercase to signify that it is used as a derogatory term. And finally, we have problematic phrases. I wanted to include more, but it would elongate the presentation too much. And I'm gonna give 3 examples. The first is Mujer de Pelo en Pecho, which it is present in Frances Negrón-Muntaner's essay. And there are 2 instances of the phrase. The first is ella era una mujer de pelo en pecho, es decir, una lesbiana, and the second was epítetos como mujer de pelo en pecho. The problem I've encountered with this phrase was that one, I couldn't find it anywhere, and then a friend and colleague of mine she saw the phrase and let me know that the original phrase was hombre de pelo en pecho, which is used for men that are strong, virile, and bold, which are all traits that are regarded as positive in men. However, when you twist the phrase to mujer de pelo en pecho, it is, especially in the context it was used, it is meant as an attack on Saida Hernandez's femininity. And I considered it a roundabout way of calling her what here in Puerto Rico would be a bucha or a dyke, which is the term I used for, in the translation, I couldn't find a phrase that had the same connotation or would have the same impact, which is why in the first instance, in both instances, I left it in Spanish. And originally in both, I had it in parentheses, but in the first one, the parentheses felt redundant because of how the rest of the sentence goes with es decir, una lesbiana, which is why I opted for expanding on the meaning with she was a mujer de pelo en pecho, in other words, a lesbian, but more specifically a dyke. And in the second one, I did use the parentheses. The second phrase I had problems with was siete machos, also in Frances Negrón-Muntaner's text, which was not the complete phrase. The complete phrase is se le meten los siete machos, and it is used when someone is getting aggressive towards someone else. In this case, I also opted to leave it in Spanish and place the translation parentheses for the same reason as the previous one. I couldn't find a phrase that would have the same connotation. I cannot say that I'm particularly satisfied with that solution, but I looked and I couldn't find anything that would have these connotations. And finally, in Un rayo de luz para la luna negra, there is a moment where the main character is describing his son. And he finishes that description with sabe tanto que sabe a mierda. And the issue I encountered with this one was that it was the play on words. My first translation lost that completely. And then I changed it to, he knows so much, he's a know-it-all. But in comparison to the original, that is rather tepid, a rather tepid translation. My advisor suggested the use of the phrase hot shit somewhere in the translation, which I should have thought of that. It was right there. But that's how I came to he knows so much, he thinks he's hot shit. As opposed to he is, which would imply that his father thinks that he actually is all that impressive. And that is my presentation. Thank you for listening. And I pass over the mic to the readers.
Okay, thank you very much, Veronica. There were quite a few very difficult issues in these texts. And one of the things we talked about is, I think also it depends on the nature of the text as to what you can and cannot do. If you have a work of fiction, you really have to try to be as creative as possible. And you don't want to put in footnotes, or you don't necessarily want to put in parentheses, or be, you have to really work very carefully with that. So, I think that you demonstrated those aspects, also dealing with different genres. Okay, I'm going to shut up now, and I'd like to hand the floor over to our readers. Do either one of you wish to go first, Marian or Luis?
Marian, go ahead. You're our guests.
Oh, thank you. And thank you so much, Veronica, for inviting me to participate in your committee. And thank all of you for allowing me to be on the committee. I think that the project is a very important project. The translation of these 3 texts, which in the case of the 2 essays are found, I would consider them foundational texts for discussing LGBTQ issues on the island, and the short story added very much to the project, because you show that you can translate different genres of texts. So I think the project, the selection of the text was excellent, and it's an important project. I have a few comments, and many of them have to do with the introduction. And since I know Rubén Ríos, since he was in my department for many years, in the section where you talk about him in the introduction, I would suggest, since you seem to talk more about the other 2 authors, I had a few suggestions on how to expand his section. Like you could put in, you mentioned where the other authors went to receive their education. You could put in that Rubén Ríos obtained his PhD from Cornell in 1983. And you said in your presentation, you noted that he was in the comparative literature department for 29 years. And you said that in the presentation, I think that would be important also to include in his bibliographical information, his biographical, sorry, I'm still waking up, information in the introduction. So I will send you, I have a few other comments, which I'll talk about now, but I will also send the document later on today to you and your advisor, David, and you can decide which of the suggestions you want to incorporate. Another thing in the introduction that I was thinking, when you quote from one of the essays or the short story, you put in parentheses the name of the editor of the anthology. And I was suggesting that maybe you could, instead to highlight the authors of the essays and the short story, you could put their name in parentheses and then have a separate bibliographical entry for each of them in the work cited, so that you foreground them more rather than only the editor of the anthology. And also when you talk about Rubén Ríos, sometimes you don't really mention his name very often, also when you're talking about Queer Nation. So I had a few places where I suggested that instead of saying the author, you could say Ríos Ávila, also to foreground him more. About the texts, I thought your translations were very good. There I had just a few suggestions. Sometimes it has to do with format, and again, you and your advisor can decide which suggestions to accept or not. For example, when you are keeping a title of Spanish, a title in Spanish that was originally in Spanish, instead of capitalizing all of the nouns, I think that even if you're writing in English, but you leave the title in Spanish, I think the title should still have everything not capitalized, since it's a Spanish title. But I'll send you my comments and you can decide which of the suggestions to keep. I would like to talk about one specific passage. Again, I think you translated the text very well. In order of difficulty, and I'll ask you this at the very end, in order of difficulty, I think that it was probably easiest to translate Negrón-Muntaner's essay and then Ríos Ávila, because he likes to play with words a lot. So I can definitely see how it would be difficult to decide whether to capitalize queer or not in any given instance, because he often likes to have several meanings, several layers at any given time of a word in the text. So I would think that his is probably more challenging to translate, and then the short story probably the most. You can be thinking about that question. That will be my final question for you. But I would like to talk about 3 passages, one from each first. This is only the second time I'm involved in a defense in the translation department, so I'm not entirely sure what the format is. But I wanted to talk about and maybe ask about 3 different passages. One is on page 11
of the source text or the translation.
Of the translation.
Okay.
So one is on page 11 in Rubén Ríos Rios's text, Queer Nation, where he's talking about the uncanny. I think it's the second paragraph or the first full paragraph that starts out, "There is such an uncompromisingly foreign foundation to the construction of the individual." The last sentence of that paragraph is, in the translation, "only a structure organized based on parricide, a structure modeled from conflict with the father and with the mother's desire as point of departure, is uncanny." I think that Freud was probably pointing to desire for the mother rather than mother's desire, because it has to do with the Oedipal complex.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
In the source text, wait, that's in, just to have the comparison on my screen.
Yeah, let me find that here.
And that's the term uncanny is how unheimlich is translated from German. So there's no problem with that term.
Well, that part was great.
I agree, Marian. I agree with you on that. It's a little bit ambiguous in the English. So desire for the mother.
Okay.
It's on page 10 of the original, right in the middle.
Page 10, okay.
And in Spanish, it's a construction that could go either way in the translation. The mother's desire or desire for the mother.
Yeah, but it's obvious what we're talking about here.
Yeah, I agree with that because, yeah. Let me see. Here. It says conflicto con el padre y el deseo de la madre como punto de partida. Yeah, it is. In the Spanish, it could be either one, but it should be for the mother.
So that was the past, because there were very few, I had a few, like I mentioned, there were a few, like here and there, adding a comma or things like that, or a few minor suggestions, but I just wanted to talk about a few places because there's only a very few where maybe the meaning of the translation where I had some sort of question about the meaning of the translation, like how it comes across the content, the meaning from the original to the translation, because it, all in all, it was a very good translation. So for the second essay, and I'm trying to find the passage in the Spanish text, it's on page 23 of the Spanish, at the very bottom, por lo que. And then in the English, the translation is on page 24. So this, I was wondering, I had a few questions about, I mean, I think it would be difficult to translate this passage in some ways, but I was wondering if maybe keeping the original syntax a little bit more would be helpful in conveying the meaning. So I was thinking something like, instead of starting like with, so why, starting out with something like, I would suggest that, because sometimes she does use I here in the essay, the first person. So I would suggest that, instead of worrying about the sexuality of a virtual being, it would help improve the quality of life of so many Puerto Ricans if they use all that thirst for knowledge to talk with brothers, mothers, and friends in the neighborhood, at work, and on the streets. Sort of maintaining more of the original syntax and not turning it into a question.
Yeah, well, I agree with you, Marian. That's an awkwardly rendered sentence to begin with, so that can certainly be improved.
That was on page 27?
24.
24, okay.
The last paragraph, the first sentence. And I'll send the document with my suggestions.
Yeah, the beginning is, rereading the beginning is quite awkward.
Yeah, there must have been some transitional shift there that didn't make it to the...
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, so maybe expanding the transition a little bit.
Yeah, well, it has to be, you know, and it could have been one thing or another that, you know, and also, you know, a lot of time I give my comments or my revisions in track changes, and so maybe part of it could be my fault. It's very likely my fault. I don't know.
But because I did reread before sending the text to the readers. I did reread all of them, and I didn't catch it either. So
yeah, it always helps to have a lot of eyes.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
And let's see. And again, I thought the translation is very good. There were just a few passages.
Hello?
Marian, did you freeze?
Yes, I think she froze.
I think she froze.
Oh, no, she's not. Yeah, she's.
You're breaking up a little bit, Marian.
You're breaking up a lot, actually. Let's see. Let's wait. Let's wait. I will send her.
Marian, you're aware of what we're commenting? Know that you've broken up and you're frozen right now.
I'm gonna send her a chat message to see if she can see it. Marian, you're frozen.
Okay, that's a good idea. That's what I was going to suggest.
Yeah, we'll wait for her. Just wait for a second. She'll come back.
I mean, what we could do as well, Luis, if there's a continued problem, you could begin with your.
I didn't want to intervene because none of the things I agree with the things she suggested, and I think they're very good suggestions, but I was gonna talk about something else, and I'd rather wait for her because she can give feedback.
Yeah.
So this will give you time.
I think she lives quite.
Calm down.
Yeah, I think that she lives quite far out in the countryside, so there might be some signal issue. Yeah. I mean, I don't know where she is right now.
She was having quite a good connection, I think.
Beforehand, yeah.
Yeah, before.
Yeah. So we'll wait just a little bit.
I decided to move right next to the router for that very reason.
Yeah. Whenever if you this is my technical advice. Whenever you have an option of physically connecting your computer.
Yeah.
That's the best.
Because I had because I think my computer doesn't have the outlet for. But I had a how do you call it?
An Ethernet connector.
An Ethernet cable and another connector that I connected the Ethernet cable to that, and then the USB connection to the computer, and I lost the connector.
Oh, that's too bad. Yeah. There she is. She's back. There you are, Marian. You have your mic. It's muted. Let me. Let me ask her to unmute.
Marian?
No, I don't think she has a good connection. Okay, she's okay.
She's here. Okay.
She's here. Okay, let me write to her. Hi, everyone. Okay, good.
Okay, I think maybe
Okay, you don't have to do the visual if that's, I mean, if that's gonna cause any other problem. Are you're pretty far away from San Juan, aren't you?
I am. I'm up in the mountains. And my internet often goes out. I'm sorry.
That's fine. We'll wait for you. Not a problem.
I was almost finished. I only was going to talk about this one other passage.
Go ahead.
On page 28. I don't know. I noticed I was talking to myself there for a minute, so I don't know because the connection went out. So I don't know how much you heard of what I was saying.
I don't think we heard very much of anything.
Okay.
Yeah.
So in English, it's the translation is at the bottom of page 28 in the short story.
Yes.
And in the Spanish, it's on pages 27 and 28. So the last line of 27 and the first line of 28, especially the first line of 28 about Lot's wife. I think what the comparison is here is that Rolando, that's his name, right? Rolando, he's arrived at the home for the elderly, but he's still looking back to his past life. Like he's thinking about his wife who's passed away. He's he's looking back. He doesn't want to continue on. So I think the comparison is to Lot's wife when she looked back on now I don't remember if it was Sodom or Gomorrah.
The burning plain.
Back at the city, right? And she didn't.
The burning plain.
Yeah, and so it's when she abandoned her home.
Okay.
Instead of his. It's.
Oh, okay. Yes. All right.
Yes. That it's not another member of the population because that's how I interpreted it, that it was another member who also lived in the home for the elderly they reside in.
Oh, okay. Let me see. Reminiscent of the
that
one.
It might be a.
Oh, I see. You're thinking that the he refers to Rolando.
Wait. Let me look at the original a moment.
Yeah, that is kind of ambiguous. It is. It's very. It's.
Because the way I interpreted the source text, I thought of Lot or Lot's wife as someone that was living at the home for the elderly and did not think of that at the time I did not think of the story of her looking back to the city.
Yeah, I think
but
it's
it certainly could.
So though you can decide if you want to about how you want to translate it, because it is somewhat ambiguous, I see in the Spanish, but putting it together in the phrase altogether, reminiscent of the one its wife suffered through, I would put when she abandoned her home, unless you change the syntax somewhat to clarify that you think abandonó su hogar is referring to someone else.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's all my comments. I guess I have that question still about commenting. If you would comment a bit about how you found the two essays and the short story, comparing them as to the challenges of translation, which was easiest, which was most difficult.
The easiest for me when I was actually translating was actually the short story. Once I made the switch to author instead of essayist, because I've throughout my childhood and adulthood, I've always liked writing stories. So that transition was easier for me once I made the switch. The second easiest would be Negrón-Muntaner's essay, and Queer Nation would be the most difficult, and it was also the first one I translated because I knew it would take me the most time after reading it, because of the layered, the play on words and the layered meanings, and the Queer Nation was definitely the most difficult to translate for me.
Very good. Thank you again for inviting me. It was
okay, don't go away, Mary.
Okay, I'll be here. I'll just mute myself.
Okay. Luis, if you wouldn't mind providing us with your comments.
Sure. First of all, Veronica, thank you for inviting me, and thank you for choosing this text. It was you chose a very difficult text to translate, and I think it's ordered in the order of complexity towards less complex text. I think that the first text is incredibly difficult to translate. It has very, 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 very long sentences, and I think actually managed to stay pretty close to the Spanish syntax and still be able to render it into an understandable version of English, though the author himself he expresses very complex ideas. But before, let me start at the very beginning, como decía Maria. First of all, let's talk about your preface. I really, really, really loved the first part of your preface, your discussion of the selection of the text, the importance of the text. I think it's absolutely important, and I really, really like how you organize all of your ideas. I marked some. There's an issues with uniformity. Like, for example, Frances Negrón-Muntaner, you sometimes use hyphen, you hyphenate it, and sometimes you don't. Choose one, stick with one. And I agree with what Marian said about the names, the title of the Spanish casing. If it's in Spanish, just use Spanish case.
That might be interference from work.
Yeah.
The way.
But make sure I marked most of them, but make sure that if it's in Spanish, you use Spanish casing. And also, if you're using, actually, I think this is all of the style guides use this. When you're quoting, when you're referring to an article within a journal, it should be quoted with no italics.
Okay.
For the most part, I think I marked them all. So make sure whenever it's a title, of a book, it's italicized, and if it's a title of a part of a book or of an article, that should be quoted and no italics. The other thing about formatting is you almost got it perfect. Is all of the students always get the numbering, they get the wrong font. You have the wrong font and the numbering. That you just need to change the normal style and it'll fix everything. We just put everything in the normal style as Times New Roman, or I think you use Times New Roman. That will fix your numbering. Let me see, the other thing about formatting. Well, the suggestion that Marian gave you about using the authors' names, I think that's what you should do. In any case, if there's any reason to quote the editors, Eric's old name is David Caleb Acevedo. Acevedo is his last name. So whenever if you need to make a reference to the editor, you should use Acevedo et al., not Caleb Acevedo, because Caleb is his second name. It's not his last
That's
name.
for the parentheses.
If you happen to use it, if you happen to keep it at, you need to keep the editor references for some reason, make sure you use Acevedo instead of Caleb Acevedo, because Caleb is his second name. And then I would in that same reference, I would put the author's name and the page number, and then my translation right there. Don't put those footnotes. I don't think they're necessary. Just put my translation within the same reference, and then you don't have to worry about all those footnotes that on your translator's note. I said, yeah, excelente presentación about the importance of this text. I think you did a wonderful job presenting the importance of choosing this text and translating this text. On the other hand, on the part of the translation and its challenges, I always like to have things organized
with titles.
Yes, titles, and it helps. And there's actually it's not only that I'm an erotic character in this play, but it's that it helps your reader find what you're talking about. And I always like to try to be, because you never are sensible enough, but I always try to be sensible with blind readers and people with a heart of difficulty in their vision, because those titles and subtitles, organizing the text using different levels, helps them see the structure of the text, and it helps the reader, and it also helps people that have ¿cómo se dice? Problemas cognitivos. It builds a map and it helps people read better your paper. And because I felt that you can kind of like jump around different things. I don't know. I was quite I was confused, because I think you jumped around talking about different things. That was my impression. Maybe I'm wrong, but just, I mean, if you can organize things and add headlines, so you can, you can. I mean, that's a suggestion. It's not 100% important. I don't agree with some of your choices about using queer for example, pato, pato, pato. I think it's what. Yeah. I would use fag. I think it's. I mean,
it's stronger.
Yeah, I think it's stronger, and I when I'm talking about that, because you're making a reference on your note, but I noted it down on the text. I think. Yeah, I think you should.
I tried to differentiate it too, because in the source text, there was later he used maricón, which is stronger. So I tried to use two different levels.
Well, you know,
it depends on del pato y el maricón que te estén diciendo.
Yeah, but you know,
I can be very hurt depending on that from un macharrán like him, pato, pato, pato is as bad as maricón, maricón, maricón. I would feel more threatened or insulted if somebody. It all depends on the context, on where you're at, and of course on where you're standing on your queerness and how much you care about that.
I just wanted to say, I don't want to interrupt too much, but I think, you know, it is the context, and these words can be, you know, weapons, you know, regardless. I mean, and we all, you know, we know that from not all of us, but we know from our own experience, you know, and I know growing up in the United States, you know, that there was, you know, a varied ammunition. And, you know, sometimes it would be queer, sometimes it would be fairy, sometimes it'd be fag, some, you know, sissy, you know, but the strongest one, and the one that's used more often probably is fag or faggot. But queer was used a lot too, especially, you know, going back like in the 60s and 70s. But I think that, you know, your point is certainly well taken.
Yeah.
And one of the things I took into consideration when using queer was the character's age. If the date of the text, in-text date, was also the same date as the date it was published, with would be 2007. It would be, he would have been born in the late 30s, if I'm not mistaken.
It would be like my dad.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then there are other terms that are even older, like pansy, you know, or fruit, or fruitcake, or, you know, but those aren't as strong. But I don't know. I think Veronica, that's very true. That it you know, you're talking about an older man here, and so, you know, I'd have to think, for example, you know, what my father's generation would have been saying, you know, and in those cases you heard a lot things like that, you know, pansy, fruitcake, you know, queer as well, and less so fag and faggot. Fag and faggot became more like my generation. I think, you know, at least I may be wrong. I don't know.
Yeah, it's since the derogatoriness of the term has shifted and varied throughout time. It hurts differently depending on what time. I feel for me, I would not feel, I don't care if somebody calls me pato, maricón, or whatever. I really don't care at this point in my life, but not even probably 20 years ago, it would have been something very difficult to handle. So it's very difficult to translate that. So yeah.
But you know, I think actually, since it's a work of fiction, since this is, you know, a work of fiction, there's no reason why you have to use the same term all the time either. And maybe some of those outdated, you know, more outdated terms like fairy, pansy, fruitcake, you know, you could throw one of those in, you know, just to also give the readership an idea of when, you know, of how dated the language is.
Yeah. And talking about queer, I agree with the decision of the casing you chose. The implementation part, I think it's very difficult. because sometimes you don't know what kind of queer he's talking about.
Exactly.
It's difficult to I don't know if it would, I mean, you could, I didn't write to this just occurred to me now. I don't know if you want to revisit your queer decision, because if you choose to capitalize it for one thing and not capitalize it for another, then you are just closing the doors and not being queer enough. I don't know, it's just something to think about. Just play with that. And
I have a suggestion then. Is it possible to replace queer when it's meant derogatorily or externalizing, you know, externalizingly? Would it be possible to use another term then, maybe fag or, you know?
Yeah, but I'm thinking more about the first essay, which is
yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking, I mean, Rubén, he probably means in some instances queer is the queer community. Sometimes it's strange, sometimes it means transgressive, anything that goes against the norm. He always has many different levels of meaning. And maybe he means all of them at the same time.
Yeah, and sometimes it's all of them at the same. He also uses it for the relationship between Puerto Rico and the United States.
You know what? I would just capitalize it everywhere in that essay and just let people decide. I mean, when it's clearly it means the community, maybe you should use. I don't know. Think about it. I really don't know what to do. I don't know what did you by people to translate. It's not a requirement to choose a very difficult text. But you did. I think you did beautifully. Anyway, so that's the thing with let me see. Let me go just like really quickly. I've suggested some things. There's some. For example, the pegatina. Pegatina is not a label, it's a sticker.
Okay.
I mean, labels for me are like those
sticker. Yeah. You're
Avery
right.
labels. Pegatina is a sticker, any kind of sticker. And then there's like a big problem. And I think this is something you probably need to think about, and you need to discuss in your translative preface. Why did you choose to translate Estado Libre Asociado as Commonwealth?
What?
Yes. No. I think he's using, and it's an advantage of writing in Spanish. There is an irony in using Estado Libre Asociado in this text. And if you use Commonwealth, which is the discourse of del colonialista, I mean, I don't know.
It loses that.
Yes, it loses the irony of free associated state.
Maybe put it in quotes then.
Yes, I would not use Commonwealth because there's no Commonwealth anywhere. At least on our side of the equation, there's no Commonwealth. The Commonwealth is somewhere else. It's difficult to use the official translation. You could entretenerte reading Alejandro's doctoral thesis about that, and decide what do you want to do with that.
You could put it in quotes as free associated state.
Yes, I would very much leave it like that, and maybe have like a little discussion on why this is not something you should.
Why it shouldn't be, why Commonwealth shouldn't be used in that instance.
I don't think Commonwealth.
Well, Puerto Rico is not Massachusetts or Virginia. Puerto Rico is not Massachusetts or Virginia. But you could play with it too.
Yes.
I'm Commonwealth, common hell, common what? I don't know.
Entonces, let me see, there's another. The part when you talk about the anus doesn't feel pleasure. No. The anus, no, esa parte.
That's at the end of Queer Nation.
Page 12 of your translation. ¿Y cómo que dice en español? Italiano. Ok, cierta organización del organismo de la jerarquía histórica destina el ano a la exclusiva función de la excreción y no al goce. It doesn't mean that the anus doesn't feel pressure. It means that it should say the function of excretion, not pleasure.
Okay.
Porque no habla, o sea, el ano es para cagar, es lo que está diciendo, no para sentir placer. This is a question for you, English speakers. In that same page, down at the last paragraph, for proof a button is enough. Is that
Wait, where are you? I don't.
Page 12. That same page.
I'm on page 12. I don't see where you.
At the bottom.
I know. I'm not seeing on page 12. Oh, a button is enough.
Is that a good translation for para bottom para?
Where is that?
Empieza el párrafo. Homophobic violence is actually unleashed against homosexual desire, to use the phrase that made Guy Hocker-Gagen famous in the 70s. For proof, a bottom is enough. I don't think, does that get through in English?
What is the Spanish?
Para un botón, para muestra un botón basta. It's literal translation. I don't think that works in English. I would just say as an example.
Yeah, I don't think it works in English either. I remember reading that and thinking, what? But then I guess I read on and didn't come back to it.
Yeah, it was like, well, I don't think that works. I think that you should. It's lost. The.
Okay, we'll have to go revisit that.
Yeah.
Yes.
There's some typos which I find the slapped for ganata. It's very guantecito fino. I don't know if there's a harder word for ganata in English. The slap is so like.
Because off the top of my head, I think of maybe backhand, which would, but I don't think.
No sé, it just sounds es como que bastante sí. Not, I mean, I don't mean to be. No sé, gasnata. I think it's harder, but I mean, it's just a comment. Let me see if there's anything else.
Yeah, add something to add strength to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's some suggestions I make of things I should. The original phrase no es meta la pata en San Juan, it's metas la pata, no metas la pata en San Juan. Es un tú. It's a. No
so the source text was incorrect then?
Yes, I mean, this is what I remember. What I remember is that the slogan was "No metas la pata en San Juan." So it's not a dike; it's no metas the dike, which is quite worse. I also noted that.
Well, you know what we had this discussion, and I think what the idea was, we were trying to do a play on words as well. You know, exactly, with dike and dike, and you know, so so yeah, I mean, because there's that play with words, you know, like don't, but I think it works okay. Don't put a dike in. I think it works better with an indefinite than definite article.
I think it's more offensive if you use the dike.
Marian, what do you think?
Your mic is off.
Yeah, I think probably it's more offensive to put the dike because it's pointing her out.
Yeah, it's like
specifically.
But if it's an indefinite, it means that you would want any dike there. So
yeah, that's true.
Yeah, but it's being directed towards her. And
yeah,
that's
it also means that we don't want any of them here.
Yeah. Well, think about it. It's not
yeah, I would probably translate it as a dike in this case. Whether or not it's more offensive or not.
Yeah, but I think it's just the idea of any. We don't want that kind. You know, we don't want any of them.
Right.
Because they were at the way they were going about it, they were using that as a way to discredit her.
See, yeah, obviously. This is towards her directly.
It's incredible.
You can think about it. You can think about it, and you can decide, sleep over it. And then on page 29, this is on the last, on page 29 in the translation and page okay, and it's on page 28 on the original one. It's in the conversation, the first conversation that they have when they introduce each other. He ends up the conversation, cuando tenía que ser fue. Me retiré analizando la construcción de la oración. So he didn't say fue cuando tenía que ser. He said cuando tenía que ser, coma, fue. And I think you need I think you need to reflect that on the English version, because otherwise it was when it had to be. I think that's a normal syntax of a sentence, and then the next reflection he makes doesn't make any sense. I think. You guys tell me.
Why is it? My screen suddenly went blank. Give me a moment.
But you're here. I can see you. I can hear you.
Okay.
All right. Well, that would make sense.
Yeah, I think you have to
complicate the syntax.
Yeah, it should say. ¿Cómo fue que? No, I didn't write it. It was when it had to be. When it had to be, comma, it was.
Yeah, that would be fine.
Yeah, it should be the same sentence structure, which is weird, so that the next line makes
sense.
Yeah. And yeah, and then after that, in page 31, there was a little translation that I don't think works. Right at in the middle of the last paragraph, I've always denounced those men who slipped up after the second cup. Después de la segunda copa.
Yeah.
After the second drink.
Yeah. Second drink.
And that's it. I've made suggestions. I have more questions, things that you should think about, or I would like you to think about. But this was a very difficult text to translate, and I think, for the most part, you did a wonderful job. So I congratulate you, and thank you for choosing the text and translating it. I think it's very important that we, even if it's a little bit outdated, and this is these are very, very, very big double quotes.
Look where we're heading.
I know.
This book might be burned in another 10 years.
Of course. It's important that we all speak up, and this is a translation is a vehicle for speaking up.
Yeah.
So I commend you on that. Thank you.
Okay. So now Marian and Luis will stay here, and Veronica, you're going to be exiled momentarily. And while we discuss
our internet public will also be exiled for a moment.
Yes.
So I'll
Okay, we're live again. Veronica, we overwhelmingly have decided that you deserve a sobresaliente for your work, and I would even go so far as a recomendación para publicar.
Oh, yes.
And I think we can add that to it, which would be the highest honor you could get. And I think that this, we've all said that this is an important text, a very, very important text. But I think that you should stress that a little bit more in your preface, given what's happening in the United States right now, that books of this nature are being banned across the country. That, this is not just for a US readership, this is for an international readership. It's evidence, and so I think that, it's evidence of a historical progression that may now be going into a regression. So if you could add something about that in the preface, and also, the other comments that were made by Professors Polhill and García Nevares, I think are very worthwhile taking into account. So we congratulate you. It's been a great pleasure working with you. You're a very diligent and very talented student and writer.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
You're very welcome. So we'll see our internautas on the next teachings. And thank you for coming here. And again, felicidades, Verónica. Good job.
Gracias.
Muchas felicidades. Muchas felicidades.